Hello viewers, it happened in a moment so raw, so unfiltered, that the gospel world is still trying to process it. At 55, Kirk Franklin did what many thought he would never do. In front of a live audience, cameras rolling and eyes fixed on him, he stepped up to a microphone and delivered a message that instantly sent shockwaves across churches, timelines, and communities around the world. It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't polite. It wasn't diplomatic. It was a man who had carried years of tension finally reaching his breaking point. And when he uttered those words that were clearly aimed at Pastor Gino Jennings, the room froze. What pushed Kirk Franklin to finally speak out? And why has this confrontation become the most talked about moment in modern gospel history? To understand the weight of this moment, you have to understand the two men behind it. Kirk Franklin, the kid from Fort Worth who grew up on rejection, abandonment, and a burning desire to turn pain into purpose. Music was his rescue, his refuge, the one thing that gave his life shape when everything else felt broken. From an early age, he learned how to take trauma and translate it into chords, lyrics, and melodies that healed millions. But behind his success was always a lingering vulnerability, the fear of never being accepted by the very world he belonged to. Pastor Gino Jennings came from a completely different universe. Raised in a strict holiness environment, taught from childhood that righteousness required separation from worldly influence, Jennings built his ministry on doctrinal purity and unapologetic truth-telling. His sermons were fire, his conviction unshakable, and his message often uncompromising. He preached to thousands with a boldness that left no room for negotiation. And for many of his followers, he became a voice of clarity in a world they felt was drifting further from biblical foundations. Two men. Two missions. Two entirely different interpretations of what the gospel should sound, look, and feel like. Their collision was never a matter of if, only when as Kirk Franklin began blending traditional gospel with R&B beats, hip-hop rhythms, and mainstream collaborations, a new wave of believers celebrated him as the future of gospel music. But for traditionalists like Jennings, this was a dangerous shift, a watering down of sacred truth. And though Jennings rarely called Franklin out by name, his sermons criticizing worldly gospel, secular collaborations, and watered-down worship were widely understood as shots aimed directly at Franklin's legacy. For years, Kirk remained silent. He chose grace over confrontation, diplomacy over defensiveness. But the weight of public scrutiny, indirect jabs, and subtle attacks slowly built up. Interviews began hinting at frustrations. Social media posts carried undertones of a man who felt misunderstood and unfairly judged. Every time Jennings delivered another sermon questioning the motives or purity of modern gospel artists, fans knew exactly who he was referencing, and so did Franklin. Behind the fame, the truth was far darker. Insiders say the private pressure on Kirk began long before the public explosion. Industry peers whispered that he wasn't church enough. Online critics dissected every move he made. Even his most heartfelt songs were labeled too worldly by some religious voices. What began as theological disagreement eventually became personal, reaching into the deepest wounds of a man who had spent his childhood fighting to belong. Then came the moment no one expected. Both men were invited to the same live event, a gathering meant to promote unity in the gospel community. The auditorium buzzed with anticipation, not because a confrontation was planned, but because everyone could feel the tension simmering. Beneath the surface, Kirk Franklin took the stage with his usual composure, but something in his eyes revealed that he was no longer willing to stay silent. He began by addressing the state of modern gospel, the pressure artists face, and the responsibility leaders have to uplift rather than tear down. His tone was careful, until it wasn't. With the entire room locked in silence, he delivered the line that detonated the moment. For those who think gospel has to fit into their box, or that leadership is about pointing fingers instead of building people up, let me be clear. I will not be silenced. And I will not allow anyone's personal agenda to undermine the message God gave me. He never said Jennings' name, he didn't have to. The audience erupted. Gasps. Cheers. Shock. Phones came out instantly. Within minutes, clips flooded the internet. Kirk Franklin had publicly, undeniably, shut Gino Jennings down, and what came next would shock everyone. Jennings' reaction was swift behind the scenes. Insiders reported that he was visibly stunned, not angry, but caught off guard. For years, his voice had gone unchallenged in public forums. No major gospel figure had ever responded so boldly, so directly, and with such confidence. Some expected him to fire back immediately. But instead, he stayed silent, a silence that only fueled more speculation. Had Kirk's words hit deeper than expected? Or was Jennings preparing a response that could reshape the entire debate? The internet, however, didn't stay silent for a second. Within hours, social media exploded. Twitter threads dissected every word. Instagram was flooded with reaction videos. TikTok creators reenacted the confrontation. Some praised Kirk as a hero, a leader finally standing up for artists who had been criticized for years. Others said Jennings had a point, that the gospel needed guardrails, not glamour. Families were debating it across dinner tables. Churches paused sermons to discuss it. Even mainstream media caught the story, framing it as a clash between two titans, one representing innovation, the other representing tradition. But what came next pushed the drama even deeper. Insiders say Jennings is preparing a response. A detailed one. And depending on what he says, this confrontation could either lead to a full-blown public feud, or a shocking reconciliation no one expects. Through it all, Kirk Franklin remains centered. Sources close to him say he has no regrets. That this wasn't about ego, it was about reclaiming his voice and refusing to let criticism define his calling. For him, this confrontation wasn't about winning an argument. It was about drawing a line in the sand after decades of being misunderstood. And whether people agree with him or not, one thing is clear, this moment has permanently changed the landscape of gospel leadership. Two men. Two visions. One explosive moment that has forced an entire community to rethink authority, innovation, and authenticity.